Hello my viewers, in this video we are going to build a mobile application called NewsAPI. We are going to use React Native with Expo, TanStack or React Query for managing server state. Let's look at the final demo before we get into code. We're gonna have the home screen with bottom tab navigation, and we are going to use Expo Router for this. And on the home page, we have an image as a background with this text and buttons on that. And at the bottom here, we can search for news, and also we can view all news by countries, by all categories. When I click on the browse by categories, these are the categories that we have. And then if I click on the countries, we have these countries as well. And let's say I want to know more about Japan news, I will click on that. And I can click on it to view more. And if I want to view by music also, we're gonna have the loading, and we have all the news pertaining to music. Don't worry about this warning, we will fix it as we move on in this course. And I can also search by any title, for example, React.js, and search. As you can see the loading, and we have all the news pertaining to React.js, and if I click on that, I can see more about that. Alright, so guys, this is what we are going to build. It seems simple, but we are going to learn a lot, especially how to use Expo Router and how to use TanStack or React Query for making the asynchronous request. With this one being said, let's get into code. For part 1 of this project, we are going to create our new React Native application using Expo, and from there we will build the UI or the navigations, and then we are going to integrate TanStack into it, and lastly we will go ahead and make the asynchronous request. With this one being said, let's get into code. I have my VS Code open here, and let's visit expo.dev. and click on the read more or the documentation, and we are going to use this snippet to create our React Native project. So back to the terminal or my VS Code, open that and then paste that. With this one, it is going to configure Expo Router for us, but we want to start from scratch. Therefore, I'm going to give it a flag called template. And here I can choose the blank or any other template that I want to work with. So select blank, and then the name of the application, I'm going to name it as NewsAPI. You can name it whatever you want. Alright, so it is creating our application for us. Alright, it is done. So let me open this particular project. Perfect. And let me run. Or before that, let's configure the Expo Router. So if you click on the guides, let's scroll down here, and under the Expo Router, click on the installation. And we have two ways to install Expo Router. One is the quick start. For this one, it is going to configure Expo Router for us. But for this project, we used the manual one, so we have to install it manually by copying this one back to the project and then paste that. Alright, it is done. So let's look at the next step. We have to set up the entry point, so copy the main here and back to the project. Let's locate package.json file. By default, it is using this entry point, so replace with that. And let's look at the next step. We're going to modify the app.json file by copying this one and back to the file, and that is app.json. Place it anywhere and then bring comma here, and you can name it as NewsAPI. With this one being configured, we are done integrating Expo Router into our application. To run it, I'm going to use npx expo start. For this one, we can select the simulator that we want to run our application on. You can use iOS or Android. For me, I'm going to use the Android. So here I'm going to press A for that. So after that, I'm going to reload the application, and let's see what we have. And it says that welcome to Expo. If I click on this one, it's going to create a folder with a file called index.js. So let's do it manually. So at the root of my project, I'm going to add one folder called app. This is a required folder. And then inside, I'm going to specify two files, and that is index.js. This is going to be the home page, and here we can decide the kind of navigation that we want to use. So here, provide_layout. This is how Expo Router works. It works similar when using Nest.js, and Expo Router was built on top of React Native library. So in case you're familiar with that, then understanding this is going to be much easier. So here we are going to decide the kind of navigation that we want to incorporate. For the final one, we saw the bottom tab. Therefore, we are going to configure by using bottom tabs navigation. So here, bring in tabs from Expo Router. And here, we are going to return the tabs as that. And that is it. With this one, we have configured bottom tab navigation. But we have one more steps, and that is the index.js. This means that when the application runs, we are going to render this particular page. Here, I'm going to use this snippet as that. I have this because I have installed an extension called ES7, ES6. It is this one, that is ES7 React, and then React Native as that. All right. So with this one, I can scaffold my React Native pages. I'm going to name this one as home. You can name it whatever you want. Now let's see the result. Let me refresh, and we have welcome home, which is this one. As you can see down here, we have the tab. So any file that I'll place in the app folder is going to be added as a path. So if I add what is called news, and then I'm going to have a subfolder called categories. And then inside, I'm going to have one file called index.js. Now let me explain how Expo Router works. It works based on the files and folders. For this one, the main entry point is going to be the underscore layout. And this layout is using bottom tab navigation. Therefore, when this one runs, it is going to look at which file or page to run. So if you use index, it simply means that the home page within the working directory. In this case, it is an app. So this means that when the application runs, it is going to locate the underscore layout, and from there, it is going to run the home page. That is why you see it here as that. Now I have added what is called news and then the categories. And then inside I have index.js. So for this one, the path is going to be like this: news, categories, and then it's going to render the index. So here, let me scaffold something like this, and I will say categories. Perfect. Now with this one, let me open the terminal and then reload the application, and let's see. And we have two tabs here. The first one is the index, and the second one is the news / categories and / index. If I click on that, as you can see here that it has been rendered. Let's begin working on the home page. With this one, I'm going to provide you with the CSS for the home page. So I'm going to replace with this one. The final source code will be provided. So let's look at the structure for the home page. We are going to have a class for the wrapper as styles.container, and then let's bring in what is called image background component from React Native, which is this one. All right, so let's pass in a couple of props. The first one is going to be the source of the image, and then provide URI, and the source of the image. Let's visit pixels.com or Pixabay, and you can copy any image address and then place it here. And then let's add the styles for this one. It's going to be styles.imageBackground, which is this one. And then let's pass in resize, that is resize mode, to be cover, and this is what we have. All right, so we have the home text here. Don't worry, we are going to fix it. After that, we are going to add the overlay. So here as view, and then add the overlay, and then let's close it here as view here. Alright, and inside we're going to have the header as view, and then let's provide a text, and then I will say Async News App. And let's add the classes to this one. Supposed to be style instead, and it's going to be the styles.header and then styles.title. With this one, let's see, and we have something like this. Don't worry, we are going to fix the issue of the alignment. The good news is that we have the text being added. Then we're going to have the actual content as view by providing style, and it's going to be styles.content. And let's begin with the subtitle, and the text goes like this, and then provide the style as styles.subtitle. With this one, save it and let's see, and this is what we have. Let me remove the home text here, which is this one. And for the image background, we have to wrap it with the inner view here as image background. And this is what we have. What has left is the adding of the links or the buttons for navigation. So we're going to provide what is called touchable opacity, and then inside we're going to provide a text, and for the text I will say browse by categories. Alright, so let's see, and we have something like this. Don't worry, we're going to add some styling to the opacity style, and we're going to use style.button, and then when a user click on this one, therefore we're going to provide the event handler. At the moment, we are just going to console log browse by categories, and this is what we have. Let's also add some styling to the text itself, which is style dot button text. All right, then we're gonna have one for browse by countries. Copy the entire of this, paste it, and change this one to browse by country. At the moment, when I click on it, it doesn't do anything. Therefore, let's add the main logic, and I'm going to use router from Expo Router for navigation. We are going to have instance of the router here. Therefore, instead of console logging, we are going to use the Expo Router as router.push. I'm going to push the user to the categories. In this case, it is going to render or call this particular categories over here. So moment of truth, when I click on it, as you can see, this is what we have. What about the countries? So let's add, instead of console logging this, we are going to use router.push and news / categories. But for this one, I'm gonna have inner folder for the categories as country categories. For this one, the path is going to be news, categories, and country categories. Therefore, let's add the index.js. So here, let me scaffold something here, and I will say all countries. So when I click on it, as you can see, the path doesn't match. Therefore, let me provide it, copy the name of the folder as a path, and back to the home page, it is equal to news, and then categories / country categories. With this one, let me get back home here, and then click on that, and we have all countries. Now that we have some dummy navigations, let's focus on integrating TimesTack into it for making the HTTP request. Don't worry, we will come back and work on the bottom tabs and other configurations. At the moment, let's integrate TimesTack into it. If you go to timestack.com, this is the official documentation, and click on the TimesTack query here. We are going to use version 5. For this one, we are going to use version 5 by the time of recording this video. That is the latest version. And TimesTack is a library for making asynchronous requests or for server management. And in case you want to learn more about TanStack, I have a course on that. And this is a library I use anytime I start building mobile applications or web applications. For this one, we can integrate with mobile or web applications. So click on the documentation and then click on the installation here. I'm gonna copy the snippet here and back to my project. I'm gonna open a new instance for installation, paste that, and I'm gonna install Axios also. Alright, it is done. So let me close all the opening instances here. I'm gonna have a folder called lib, supposed to be a folder. This is going to contain custom logics or other configurations. The first folder is going to be React query configurations. For this one, you can name it whatever you want. And I'm gonna add one file called query client. This is how we configure when using React Native. Here, let's import what is called query client, which is this. We're gonna create instance of that, which is equal to export new query client, or let me assign to a variable to make it more descriptive as query client, and let's export it as query client. Next step is that we are going to wrap this one with our entire application. So let's get into the underscore layout. This is the entry point for our application, and this is the code for bottom tab navigation. And in case we want to customize the individual pages or screens, we are going to, by using this syntax as tabs, and then inside we're going to pass in the individual screens as that. At the moment, let's configure with the query client, and that is TanStack. So here, let's bring in query client provider, which is this, and our custom query client, which is this one. So we are going to wrap by passing in the query client provider, and let's place our tabs inside, and this one takes in one prop as client. I'm gonna pass in the instance of our query client. This is similar when dealing with React Redux. Alright, with this one being added, let's see, we have no error. This means that we have successfully integrated TanStack into our application. Now, let's configure the bottom tabs over here. Let's begin with the index. I want to change this text to something like home and then the icon also. So let's see how we're going to configure it. For the individual tabs here, we're going to use what is called .screen. I'm going to pass in this required attribute, and that is a name. The name here is going to point to the name of the path or the file. In this case, it is called the index. So for this, I will say name here is equal to index. All right, with this one, let's see, and we have it as before. And we can also change the name by passing in what is called options. And the option is going to be the title is equal to home. We have overwritten the name of index to home, and this is what you see here. Likewise this. And in case you want to hide the header here, we're going to pass in comma and header shown. By default, it is true. So if I say false, as you can see, the header is gone. And I want to change this one to use icon. And for this one, as soon as you create new React Native project using Expo, by default, it has installed what is called vector icons. So if you go to Google and search for Expo icons, which is this one, and in here we can search for any icon. If I say food, now if I click on that, as you can see, this one is from Font Awesome. So all what we need is to copy this one and use the component. Perfect, right? So we are going to use material icons. So here import, which is from Expo /material icons. And to do that, we are going to use what is called tab bar icons. After the, it must be in the configuration. Let me have some room to work with. I will say tab bar icon. For this one, I'm going to assign to a callback function. I'm going to destructure the color here and use the material icons and pass in the name of the icon and the size and then the color. Now let's see what we have, and we have something like this. And if we want to increase the font size, we can say 40 here, and this is what we have. And in case you want to increase the font size, we're going to pass in what is called tab bar styles, and then we will say the font size is equal to 12, and this is what we have. Now when I click on the browse categories, this is what we have. We are going to display all the categories. Now let's see how to get the categories. So if you visit the News API, make sure to log in. In that case, you're going to have your own API keys. And we have these endpoints that we are going to hit to fetch all the news. By the time of watching this video, the API does not return any categories. But if you visit the documentation, and in here, these are the endpoints, and that is the every. For the every endpoint, we can pass in the query here, and then the search item, and then other attribute as that. And if I click on the top news, this is the top news, and we have the category here. So I have extracted this one into an array. So let me show you how I'm going to do it inside our project. So let's get into the news categories, and then in this case, this one, yeah. So let me change this one to all categories. The name doesn't matter though, it's just a convention. All right. So in here, I'm going to have some dummy categories here, which is equal to array of object provide ID. I'm going to use 1 for this, and then the name, I'm going to use business, and then I want to show some icon, and the icon I will say business, and then there is no color for this one. So here we are going to add a couple of categories. So after this one, bring comma, and you can add additional categories. So let me accept this autocomplete. Perfect. But I'm gonna provide you with the complete categories based on the final project. For this one, you can use any category of your choice. All right. So I have added that, and this is the icon name. And let me have instance of the router, which is equal to Expo Router, supposed to be use router instead. And let me provide you with the complete styling for the categories, which is this one. And for the final one, I used what is called linear gradient from Expo. So let's search for linear gradient Expo. Let me add Expo at the end, which is this one. Let's go ahead and then install that, copy that, and then back to the terminal, shut down, and let me install that. All right, it is done. So let's bring in the linear gradient from Expo linear gradient. So let me change this one to use the linear gradient, and then I'm gonna pass in some colors, which is these colors. Let me change these colors to this one that correspond to the final project, and then provide the style as styles.container, and we have it here as container. And then after that, let me change this one to use categories instead of all categories, and then provide the style as style.title. And let's see, and if I click on the browse by categories, and we have something like this. Now it's time for us to loop through the categories here. Therefore, we are going to use flat list for looping through content when using React Native. So here it goes like flat list, and then I'm going to pass in these props. The first one is going to be the data that we want to loop through. In this case, it is called the categories array, and then the key extractor. This one works similar to React when looping through content using map, unless you provide what is called a key. and that is the ID of the individual content or any identifier. And this is going to help the application to improve performance. And then gonna have what is called render item, and this render item works like map. It is going to loop through the entire categories, and then let me accept the autocomplete and let me explain what is going on over here. For the render item, we passed in the callback function, and here we are destructuring the individual item. So behind the scene, the render item is going to take the values in the data, in this case array, and then loop through it and display the touchable opacity and then the icon. And this is a link or path. When a user click on that, it is going to push the user to that page. All right, with this one, let's see. We have some error, and that is touchable opacity doesn't exist. So let's import it as that, and let's see. Go to categories, and material icons doesn't exist also. So let's bring in here as the material icons. All right, categories, and there we go. Perfect, right? But for this, I want to display two columns. So in the flat list, after the render item, I'm going to pass in what is called number of columns, and I'm going to use 3 for this, and let's see what we have. With this one, save it, and let's see. And this is what we have. The next step is that when I click on any of these ones, I'm going to take the actual text and then send to the news API to fetch the news by that category name. Therefore, we are going to make our first HTTP request using TanStack. And to do that, we are going to create a function to fetch that category. So let's just do that. Let me close the opening ones. And to be able to use TanStack for making HTTP requests for fetching, we are going to create a function that is going to return a promise. So in the lib folder, I'm going to add a folder called API. You can name it whatever you want. And then I will say api.js. And the function goes like this. I'm going to import Axios. Remember, we have already installed Axios. Before we continue, let's configure Axios to have the base endpoint. If you look at the API, this is a base endpoint. And before that, unless we know the API that we are going to consume, let's visit the NewsAPI website and make sure to sign up because you may need an API key. If I click on the documentation, we are going to use the endpoint called everything. So click on that, and in here we can pass in any query. So the query here is going to contain the category that we are going to pass in. With this one being said, let's continue with our logic. So the function here is going to be get news by category. And the function goes like this: export async. And this function is going to take in the name of the category, and let's modify the autocomplete here. Instead of using top headlines, we are going to use the everything here as you saw in the documentation. And for this, we're going to pass in a query, and that is kill, which is equal to the name of our category as that. Here, remove this one, which is kill equal to the name of our category, and then the API key. For this one, let me see my API key. Let me get back to my profile, and this is my API key. So I'm going to pass in here as that. Next step is that we are going to create a page or a screen where we are going to display all the news by the category name. Remember, this is going to be a dynamic, meaning that the user, well, let me run the application. Alright, with this one, if I click on the category, as you can see, I can click any of these ones. This means that the page is going to be dynamic. Because of that, we are going to have what is called dynamic path. So in the categories here, I'm going to add one file as square bracket, and I will say news by category. Alright, so here let's scaffold the component as that, and I will say, and the path goes like this. It's going to be news / categories and any dynamic ID that we are going to pass in, and it will call this particular file to be rendered. Now let's look at the path for the category list here, in this case this one, and this is the path, and that is news / categories and then the ID of the category, which is this one. So if I click on the categories and click on any of these ones, we have the page being rendered. So irrespective of any category, it is going to render that. So here, all what we need is to take the name of this category and then pass to this page to be able to make the request. So how can we access the category name? And use router makes it pretty easy to do that. So I'm gonna bring in use router here, which is this, and then I will say get the category. Well, for this one we will need a different hook called use local search params, and let's assign to a variable, and then let the structure, and that is news by categories, which is equal to this. We've got this one simply because the dynamic ID here is called news by category. So if I log, or let me display it here as news by category, let's see. As you can see here, we have it as travel. If I go to home, category, music, we have it here as music. So now we can call the API to fetch that news. So let's get in here and let's bring in use query for fetching data. Alright, and it goes like this. And the first one is called query key, and this is going to be any identifier for that. So remove this one, which is news category. You can use any identifier, but it must be unique. And the next one is going to be the query function, and remember, we have the function as get news by category, which is this one. All right, and what comes back from the use query, we have these properties from the time stack, and that is the actual data, error is error, the is successful. As you can see with time stack, we have all these ones given to us without us worrying about writing those codes. Well, for this one, unless we pass in the name of the category, therefore the function call is going to be as that, and then I'm going to assign to this one. Perfect. So let's log the values from the use query as supposed to be data, and then comma. All right, so let's check in the terminal. Let me get back to category, and I want to fetch all news under business. Let's check the terminal, and we have it as that. So now we can display loading and also display the actual data. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to provide you with a CSS for the displaying of the list, and replace with that, and definitely I'll provide you with the final source code. So here we are going to check for loading. So I will say in case we have is loading, let me destructure from here as is loading. In case we have one, we're gonna display some spinner, and I will say return, and it goes like this by returning a view by passing in the loading container, which is the CSS, and then loading here. But let's use what is called activity indicator for displaying the loading in case we're gonna have one. So here we pass in the size of the indicator and then the color. And let's also check for error. So I will say in case we have an error, and that is error, then we're gonna return this one by passing in the error container class and then the actual error as that. So here we know that everything goes on well, therefore we are going to loop through it. Let me provide the CSS for the actual container as styles.container, and then the text and the value is equal to the news category, and I'm gonna add news at the end. And let's see, we have business news, and then if I click on this, we have food news. And let's add some styling as style is equal to .title, and this is what we have. Now it's time for us to loop through the content by using flat list as we did before. And let's pass in the actual data as data, which can be found on the data.articles. If you log the response from the server, you're going to see that. The next one is equal to the key extractor, and which is equal to the individual item.url, which means we are finding a unique identifier about the content. And then I'm going to pass in the render item, which is going to render the individual item in the data here, in this case the data.articles. And then in here we are destructuring the individual item. So now we are going to return what is called touchable opacity, and that is if a user click on that, we can trigger some action. So inside I'm going to pass in the following styles. The first one is going to be the style.article container, and then the event handler by using onPress here, and which is equal to, for the meantime, let's just log something like, and let's display the actual content here, which is equal to the individual item. In case we have .image, then we are going to display the image. Sometimes the content may not have an image, so here we are going to use image component from React Native, which is this one. And let's add the title and then the description here. I'm going to accept the autocomplete, which is the item.title and item.description. With this one, save it and let's see, and this is what we have. The next step is that if I click on any of these ones, I'm going to display more details about this news. But unlucky for us, the API does not support details about a news. So for this one, we are going to use our own technique. So if I click on this one, I'm going to display a component to display details about this one. So at the folder structure here, and that is inside the news, I'm going to have one folder called details. And I'm going to have the file as index.js. Alright, so I'm going to scaffold the component as that, and I will say news details. Alright, so if I click on this one, and that is the view more about the news here, I'm going to display that. At the moment, we are console logging something like clicked. Therefore, we are going to use router here for navigation. And let's have instance of the router as router is equal to that. So in the onPress here, instead of console logging this, we are going to use router.push and then pass in the following. The first one is going to be the path name. The path name must match the page that we want to render, in this case news.details, which is this one. And we are going to send the data about this news to the news details page. So here you're going to use what is called params, and then title is equal to and then the description, which is equal to that, and then content, which is also equal to that, and URL to image, which is also equal to that. So now if I click on the news here, as you can see, I have the news details. So we can access the values of this one in the news details page by using use local search params from Expo Router. So in here, we are going to destructure from that. And what we want is, let me see, we want the title, the content as title. And if you log these properties, you're going to see the actual data in the console. So let's try out title and as that. And indeed, we have the content here, and then the title, and then the image to URL, which is this one. Therefore, we are going to display it here. So for this one, I'm going to provide you with the complete code with a styling, and definitely I'll provide you with the final source code. So I'm going to replace with this one and remove this, and let's import the component as that, and then the image component also as that. With this one, let's see, and with this one and that, we have the details here without the styling. So let me provide you with the CSS for that one, and this is what we have. We are going to work on the browse by country. It is going to be the same process as we did for the browse by categories. So let's visit the official documentation, and when I click on the documentation here, unlucky for us, this API does not support fetching of all countries. So when I click on the top headlines, we have a way around, and in here we can pass in the country by using their ISO code. So we are going to have a way to format this one. So let's get back to our code, and then the page for fetching all the countries is going to be the country categories, and which is this one with empty data. And this is what you see when I click on the browse by country. So we are going to display all the categories about the country here. So let's have an array of countries which is equal to countries by providing the ID of one, and the name here is going to be Afghanistan, and the key property here is going to be the code, which is equal to AF, and that is the ISO code. And let's provide the icon. We are going to use material icon, so the icon for this is going to be a flag. I'm going to provide the complete code for the countries, and definitely I'll provide them for you, which is equal to ID, name, code, and then the icon. Perfect. So we are going to loop through this one and display them accordingly. The concept is going to be the same as we did for the categories. So to make our life easier, I'm going to copy the complete code, which is this one, and then the styling, which is also this one. Now let's see what is going on over here. Like I said, for this we have done it before by using the linear gradient. So let me import the linear gradient and also the flat list for displaying the list of the countries, and then the touchable opacity. And on the press here, we are going to navigate into the news/countries, and here we're going to pass in the country code to the component to fetch all news by that country, and this is the material icon. So let me import the material icon as import, and let's destructure from vector icons. All right, with this one, let's see the differences. If I click on this, and this is what we have. When I click on any of these countries, we are going to take that code and then pass to the page called countries. Therefore, let's have the page for that, and that is in the news here. I'm gonna have one folder called countries, and then inside I'm gonna have the index.js, and let's scaffold as that, and I will say country news. Now let's see what we have. If I click on the browse by countries and I click on this one, as you can see, it is working, but we have router doesn't exist. So in the country categories, let's bring in the use router from Expo Router, and let's have instance of it as const router. Now everything will be working fine. If I click on this one, as you can see, country news. So we are going to access the code in this particular page, and we're going to use location from Expo Router, which is this. So it's going to be use local search params, and we are going to destructure from the, which is equal to that, and the value here is equal to country. And if I log or display the country here, let's see what we have. Remember, we are passing in the param as the country. That is why we have access to it in this one. I start with this one, let's see, and we have it as that. And if I click on the Australia, let's see, there is a country code. So now it's time for us to take this country code and then pass to the API that we are going to create to fetch that news. Let me close these instances and let's look at the endpoint for that. We are going to use the top headlines, which is this one, and this is the sample endpoint. We are going to pass in the country and then the code as that. So we are going to have our API to make that logic. So here is going to be get news by country, and the function is going to be as that. Here we're gonna pass in the endpoint as headlines, then the country, which is equal to the country that we're gonna pass in. So now we are gonna call this one inside the countries here, which is this, and the format is going to be the same as we did for the category. So let's copy the use query, not this one but this one. Let me check. Yeah, so I'm gonna copy the entire of this one here and then back to our countries here, which is this. I'm gonna paste it here, and let's remove this, and let me add the comment here. Let's bring in the country, supposed to be use query, and then the function is going to be get news by country, supposed to be, let me check the name of the API. It is get top news by country. Yeah, this one instead. So let's replace with get news by top country, and then pass in the country code, and let's bring in the use router for navigation. Let's log the properties data here, and then also I think this is okay for now. Let's check the console. For some reasons we have an error. If I go to country here and then click on this, let's see, and we have it as that, meaning that it is working. So we are going to loop through the data and display them accordingly. And for looping through of content, we have done it before, so I'm going to provide you with the complete code. It follows the same format as we have already done. In here we are converting the country to uppercase and appended the news here, and then let me provide you with the styling. Definitely the final source code will be provided. So let's see what we are lacking. The touchable opacity, let's import that, and then the image also, let's import that. And in here we are encoding the URL. All right, with this one, let's see, let me click on this and then click on any of this one. Flat list is not defined. All right, so let me import that by country, and touchable opacity is not defined. Let's try again, and now it worked. Perfect. The next step is that when I click on this one, we are going to display more details about the news. And lucky for us, we have the page for displaying that, and that is the details here. Alright, so we are going to change the path. In here is going to be news and then the details. So let me remove the ID from here. We don't need that. Alright, so now let me get back to the home here and any of these ones, and now it worked. The next step is that we are going to format these tabs. So let me show you where we have these tabs. Remember, at the root of our application, we are using bottom tab navigation. If you get into the app here, and this is the entry point, and remember, we are using bottom tab navigation, and that is tabs here. So this means that any folder that is inside the app is going to be regarded as bottom tab navigation. That is why we have the first one, which is index. In this case, this is what we have already customized. And we have news/details, which follows news and then the /details, which is this one. And also we have news/categories and then these ones. So let's hide some tabs here. So let's configure the main entry point. We have this one, so I'm gonna copy and paste, and the name for this one is going to be news/categories and then the country categories and then the index. Remember, it follows this format, and that is the path: news, categories, country categories, and then the index. So we can customize this one also. So instead of using this, I will say all countries, and let's see what we have, and we have it as all countries. And for the icon, we're gonna change using flag, and let's see, and this is what we have. And I'm gonna have one for the categories itself, so copy that, this one instead, and then paste it here and change the name to all categories, and the path is going to be news, categories, and then the index, and the icon is going to be category as that, and let's see, and this is what we have. I want to hide the rest of these tabs, and to achieve that, we're going to pass in one attribute called href, which is equal to null. Let me show you how I'm going to do it. I'm going to copy this one and then paste it here, or let me add a comment as hide tabs and then paste that. For this one, let's remove everything from here, and that is the options. We're going to pass in href, and we will say null for this one, and the path here is going to be categories and then /news categories. In this case, this one, I want to hide this, so let's see what we have, and now it is gone. And let's also hide the news /details and then the index. So let me get back to the main layout, which is this one. Copy this, paste it, and the path here is going to be news /details and then the dynamic ID here, and href is equal to null, and now it is gone. The next one is going to be, I think we still have it here, the path is news /details and then the index. Yeah, so remove this. Alright, now it is gone. The last one is going to be news /countries. So it's going to be news and then /countries and then the index, and now it is gone. What has left is searching of news. So we're gonna have a button here or tab When we click on that, we're gonna have a form where the user can provide the search criteria. So because of that, we're gonna have a path for it. So at the root here, let me collapse these guys. For the news, I will say everything, meaning you can search for everything. And let's have the index.js, and let's scaffold the page as all news, or let me say search news. And now let's see that it has been added over here as that. So we can also customize this one. So let's locate the root layout, which is this one. And up here, let me copy one of these. And the path here is going to be news/everything. And then we will say that search news. And let's see. And this is what we have. Let's change the icon name to search. Alright. But let me bring this one after the home. I'm just changing the order. Alright, let me bring it also after the home. Yeah, this one. And this is what we have. Alright, so let's work on the searching of the news. So let's look at the endpoint for that. We are going to use the everything. As we saw, we're going to pass in the query and then the value, and that is it. So let's get back to the API section. That is a function for fetching the news. And I will say search news, and it's going to be as async, and the function goes like this by passing in the everything here and then the query, which is equal to the query. Upon calling this function, we're going to pass in the query. So let's locate the component or the page for that. In here, we are going to manage some internal state. For example, the query and then the search query. So it's going to be as query and then comma search query. This is going to be set query instead. And then let me duplicate to have the search. I will say search query and then set search query. And then by default, we're going to use the latest news. Next step is let's have the use router from Expo Router, and let's have instance of the router as that. And let's make the request to fetch all the news by the search criteria. The format is going to be the same way as we did for the countries or the categories. So here I'm going to copy and paste the logic for fetching the news. Alright, so back to the everything here. Let me bring this one up here as that. No, it is too much. Alright, and then paste that. And let's import the use query, which is this one. And then the function or the API is called search news. So back here, change this one to search news. The auto import is fine. And I'm going to pass in our search query, in this case this one, and then comma here as enabled. So here you're going to use double exclamation mark and then the search query, meaning that this is going to run if the search query is not empty. So the comment goes like that. Let me log the result and let me open the terminal, which is this. Let me reload the application and let's see what we have. Let's wait. Alright, so click on this one and then let me check the terminal, and lucky for us we have the latest news. How cool it is. So now I'm gonna have a way for the user to enter the search criteria. So let's have the structure here. I'm going to provide you the CSS for this page, which is equal to that. And let's have the structure for this one. And for the main container or the wrapper, I'm going to use a class, and that is styles.container. let's have the title for this one as text, and I will say latest news, and then let's add the style, which is equal to style.title. And let's see, and this is what we have. And let's have some container, and that is by using view, and the class for this, or the style, I think I'm using web, so I often use class instead of style. And then inside I'm gonna have the text input, which is equal to that, and the auto import is fine for this one, so let me accept that and let me explain what is going on over here. We brought in the text input, so let me import that and let me see if it is here. Indeed, we have the auto import. We passed in the style class and then the placeholder as search news. The value here is going to be the query. This means that we are managing the form by ourselves, and we can use Formic for that. And then the unchanged text here, we're going to use the set query here. I think we have to import the touchable opacity, and now let's see the differences. Click on this one, and we have the input over here. So let's add the functionality upon searching. Before adding the functionality, let's display the data here. So for this, we are going to make a condition by using optional chaining, and that is, in case we have data, then you're going to grab the articles, and that is the dot articles. In case we have one, we are going to loop through it by using the flat list component. Otherwise, we are going to display some text, and we will say that no article found. Let's implement the flat list. For this one, we have done it before. We are taking the value from the request, and that is the data.articles, and then our key structure, which is this one, and then the render item, and inside we are going to return the touchable opacity and then the value. So let's see what is going on over here. And for this one also, we have done it many times. In here we are passing in the event handler and then call the Expo Router by passing in the endpoint that we want to hit when a user click on that post or the news. And these are the data that we are passing to the news details. So with this one, save it and let's see the magic. All right, and this is what we have, and we have this warning by saying that it has been encountered 2 children with the same key. That's the behavior when using the URL for this one. We don't have the ID for the individual news, so the key property here, which is going to be unique, is going to be the URL. But unlucky for us, we have a news or news with the same URL. So don't worry, the good news is that it is working. All right, so if I search for, let's say, food and click on search, it is not working simply because we haven't implemented the search criteria or the logic. So in here I will say search news, or let me say handle search. Then in the handle search we are going to update. Then in the function here we are going to update the search query with the query in our state. Remember, we have binded this one with the input field, in this case this one. Last step is that we are going to call the function on the onPress here. So I'm going to remove this and then pass in the handle search. With this one, save it, and this is what we have. Let me provide the loading and then the error. For this one, we have done it before. We are checking for its loading and its error. So let me require this one, that is the activity indicator. And let me refresh the application, and let's see if I say food, and we have the result as that. All right guys, so here ends this project.